接下来我们要邀请到新加坡职工总会 Ntuc 外籍劳工中心执行董事 Mr. Bernard Maynard 来为我们分享新加坡的在地经验。演讲主题是新加坡之外籍劳工权益保护政策推动与经验分享。让我们欢迎 Mr. Bernard Maynard, Executive Director, Ntuc National Trades Union Congress, Singapore.
Hi, good afternoon. 下午好。You know, as it goes with these conferences, once we get to around 1, 2 o'clock, it's going to get increasingly difficult to stay awake. So I hope to try and make this as exciting as possible. So I think I was invited to represent the Singapore perspective of how we deal with managing a very large migrant worker community in Singapore. So let me first start by giving you, these are some pictures of our volunteers at events. But let me start by giving you some facts. These are the latest factual data released by our Labour Department in June 2017, the most latest figures. There are roughly 1.4 million migrant workers, non-Singaporeans, that work in Singapore. Now, for those of you that know the population of Singapore, our total population is 5.5 million. 1.4 million is therefore more than a quarter of our total population. Our total labor force is 3.6 million. So you take away the children, you take away the very, very old people that do not work anymore, you are left with 3.6 million workers in Singapore. So 1.4 million migrant workers out of a total workforce of 3.6 million is more than 1/3. So all the other figures below are further breakdowns of our migrant population. But basically, if you have a migrant worker population more than 1/3 of your workforce and more than a quarter of your total population, it becomes very, very difficult, very, very challenging to ignore issues that face migrant workers. So it is not a situation where we can import such a large number of workers into Singapore to contribute, and after all contribute to our economy, and then act as if they don't exist. Because the fact of the matter is, you see them every day. On public transport, when you go to the movies, when you go to the market. In Singapore, if any of you have visited, it is very, very difficult to go even one afternoon without at some point seeing or interacting with a migrant worker. Okay? And this basically is why a lot of our laws, especially in the last 10 years, have been configured, amended, revised to ensure that the migrant worker population in Singapore is well protected. Okay, so the basis of all protection for all workers in Singapore, whether local or migrant, comes from the Employment Act. This is the primary employment legislation in Singapore, and it stipulates basic minimum protections guaranteed to all workers in Singapore. So things like how much rest you must have, how much annual leave you must give, by when you must pay salary, 7 days, within 7 days of the following month, salary must be paid. We do not have a minimum wage legislation in Singapore, and so that is not inside this, but all other employment conditions are also stipulated in our Employment Act. Things like how do you calculate overtime for overtime work. Now, in addition to the Employment Act, migrant workers who are trade union members in Singapore can also rely on the Industrial Relations Act and the union's collective agreement with the employer for additional protection, additional representation, and additional guarantees. So, as Mr. Haridasan rightly pointed out earlier on, the ideal way to protect migrant workers is to bring them into union representation. Then, besides your basic laws, your trade union laws will also protect them. But we have a problem in Singapore. Unionization rate for migrant workers is actually very, very low. Somewhere less than 15%. So less than 15% of migrant workers are union members. And so the trade union movement in Singapore had a problem, had a question they needed to get addressed. And how they addressed this was in 2009, the National Trades Union Congress, which is our National Trade Union Center, and the Singapore National Employers Federation, which is the national center for the employers, got together and decided to have a 50-50% partnership in a newly formed unit called the Migrant Worker Center, and that is who I represent today. The Migrant Worker Center was set up in 2009 to champion and advocate for migrant workers regardless of trade union membership status. So to overcome this question or problem I spoke about earlier about low unionization rates among migrant workers, essentially what the Ntuc in Singapore did was to set up, probably still today, the only unit in the labour movement in Singapore that is trade union membership blind. Meaning, we help every and all migrant workers, regardless of whether they pay union membership fees. So the Migrant Worker Center is one of the few units that does not rely before it assists a worker on checking whether the worker is a union member. Now the setup of the Migrant Worker Center was in line with NTUC's objective of achieving an all-can labour movement. All can in representation, meaning all collars, blue collar, white collar, all ages, young, middle-aged, and even elderly workers, and nationalities, meaning regardless of whether you're Singaporean or not, the labour movement in Singapore wishes to connect with you and represent you. Today, while trade unions take the lead to represent their migrant workers with employment disputes, the Migrant Worker Center also provides representation and assistance to non-union affiliated migrant workers. Okay, so there's a slight difference in Singapore, our statutory recovery processes, as to how you go about resolving your grievances with your employer if you are unionized and if you are non-unionized. Now on the left side, if you are unionized, you have a smoother ride. You have a trade union representative to represent you throughout your grievance or dispute, all the way until it comes to adjudication, if that is necessary, and the case goes to court for arbitration. You still have your union representative that follows you. For non-unionized workers, which basically account for most of the migrant workers in Singapore, there is no representation. Under the statutory recovery processes stipulated in the Employment Act in Singapore, for non-unionized cases, when there is mediation or arbitration, the worker attends on his own and the employer attends on his own. There is no representation. Okay? And because most migrant workers have lower education, many of them do not speak English, this causes a great imbalance in the bargaining positions of both parties from mediation and all the way through adjudication. Now, since the MWC has been set up, we provide advice, legal and employment advice to the workers all throughout mediation and adjudication. But what we do is we do it with a step-back approach. So we help them prepare their evidence, we advise them on the arguments they are to make, we fall short of going into the mediation or the arbitration to assist them there, because the law does not allow us to do so. Okay? But we provide them all the help they need and free of charge. Okay, overview of the Employment Act. It covers every employee, regardless of nationality, who is under a contract of service with an employer in Singapore, except any person employed in a managerial or executive position who earns a basic monthly salary of more than 4,500 Singapore dollars. This is because the Employment Act forms the basic minimum protection for all workers in Singapore, and the law assumes at a certain salary point that workers are more able to look after themselves. The resources are directed towards those that are most in need of assistance. So below 4,500 salary, assistance is guaranteed. There are a few other people that are excluded in the Employment Act. Any seafarer, because international maritime legislation already protects them. Any domestic worker, so domestic workers are not covered in our Employment Act. Their protections are captured in another legislation called the Employment of Foreign Manpower Act. But the reason why the basic minimum conditions of work cannot be included in the Employment Act for domestic workers is because the argument is because there are certain conditions of domestic workers' employment that are very difficult to generalize and then legislate for. So you need specialist legislation to look after them. So let me give you an example. Most domestic workers live in with their employers. So there's there's a lot of difficulty in crystallizing the hours of work for this domestic worker, because she lives with her employer. Let's say hours of work end at 8 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock she comes out of her bedroom, and then she sees dishes in the sink, dirty dishes, and she washes them. Right? Does that count as overtime work? The way the Employment Act is structured in Singapore, it does. Therefore, it is very difficult to legislate for such situations. And this is the argument the government provides for excluding domestic workers from the legislation and putting them elsewhere in a more specialist legislation. And also excluded from the Employment Act are any government servants. Government servants have their own government service legislation to protect their employment. So this is roughly the basic standards that are provided in the Employment Act in Singapore. Okay? We've put in some Chinese words. I hope they are accurate. But I'm not going to go through every single one. But generally, this is what the Employment Act covers. Dispute resolution. If, let's say, you have a dispute over employment, the way to settle the dispute is also denoted inside our Employment Act. So generally, in Singapore, resolving employment disputes is broken into two steps. The first step is conciliation, meaning mediation. Everybody prefers if employer and employee can sit together, resolve amicably the disputes that they have, and then continue to work. The employee continues to work with the employer. Everyone is happy. That is a win-win solution. So our dispute resolution process goes through conciliation as the very first step. However, there are instances where mediation and conciliation is unsuccessful. And in those cases where the worker still wants to bring his claim feels strongly about bringing his claim against his employer, then we go into arbitration, which for unionized cases is conducted through our industrial arbitration court. And this one, lawyers from your trade union will represent you. Okay? For non-unionized workers, the case goes through, since last year, a newly formed court called the Employment Claims Tribunal. Okay, the Employment Claims Tribunal replaces the statutory court, an administrative court previously in existence called the Labour Court. But who we had presiding over the Labour Court were actually Labour Department officials that are given the power in the employment laws to oversee over such hearings and make decisions. How we have improved this is, now that the Employment Claims Tribunal has been set up, the Employment Claims Tribunal is actually operated by Singapore's state courts. So you actually have qualified judges that adjudicate over the employment disputes. So in a way, this is a tightening of the system and improvement to the system. Okay, for the Migrant Worker Center, these are our dispute management stats. Total number of cases we have registered for the last 3 years hovers around 4,000 cases a year. What this means is, as long as I go beyond answering a simple question, I register the case, I represent the worker, I help him gather evidence. If his employer kicks him out of company accommodation, I provide him shelter. If the company ceases to provide him with food and subsistence, I provide him with the food and subsistence. All those cases amount to roughly 4,000 in the last 3 years. So 4,000 per year for the last 3 years. And the breakdown of the types of cases, the Migrant Worker Center is probably today among the non-government organizations, Singapore's leading NGO in salary-related claims and complaints by migrant workers. So about 40% of our cases are made up of salary-related claims. Late payment, short payment, non-payment, illegal deductions, anything to do with not paying the worker the proper salary. And then about 30% cover work injury compensation. I understand from some of our Taiwanese colleagues that in Taiwan you also have an insurance-based work injury compensation system. And so we have the same thing. The problem is there are some times when employers do not purchase the insurance for their workers, and then if an accident happens, they are unable to compensate. Our law says the employer must then pay the compensation himself. Okay? And then of course there are other instances where there are disputes. Worker says he was injured in a worksite, employer says no, this is not a worksite injury, you know. And in cases like that, often there is a need to mediate and arbitrate, and the MWC will represent the worker. Then 15% of our cases are made up on housing standards. In Singapore, all the laws place the responsibility to house migrant workers on the employer's shoulders. So if you employ migrant workers and bring them to Singapore, you must provide proper and adequate accommodation and care, subsistence, meaning food, living costs. The employer is responsible for everything. From time to time, you have cases where employers have refused to provide, and therefore there's a need for an organization like us to represent the worker. And lastly, about 15% make up other Employment Act disputes or non-employment related issues. Okay, I already briefly went through. We have a work injury compensation system, just like Taiwan has, right? It is payable under the Work Injury Compensation Act, and even if the worker no longer works for the company or his work pass has been cancelled, regardless of who the accident or disease, what can workers claim? They can claim through our laws and through insurance medical expenses with specific limits, and only by Singapore registered doctors. They can claim for medical leave wages, meaning while they are on MC, they can claim for the salary. And they also can claim from the insurance compensation for permanent incapacity or death. 2 years ago, the limits to the work injury compensation payouts were raised. So today, if a worker, whether he's a migrant worker or a local worker, because work injury compensation covers all workers, if a worker dies in the workplace as a result of a work injury, work-related injury, the compensation will pay out to a maximum of 204,000 Singapore dollars. So that is the maximum payout for death, 204,000 Singapore dollars. Okay, I'm actually not sure what the equivalent value is in Taiwanese dollars. So this is roughly the system. Worker sustains injury. The law requires the employer to file a claim for the injury. Many times the employer doesn't do so. So the worker approaches the migrant worker center. We refer the worker to a legal clinic that we have. It's a volunteer legal clinic we have in partnership with the Singapore Law Society. Volunteer lawyers come and speak to the workers if they have legal issues. And then the lawyer will help the worker decide whether to go through the work injury compensation law or to go through the common law, meaning to sue his employer for the injury. Okay? Obviously there are differences, but essentially the main difference is you go and sue the employer, you are no longer bound by the statutory limit of 204,000. You can sue for damages, any amount of money depending on what your lawyer wants to sue for. But the big difference is you have to prove that the accident resulted as from the employer's fault. That means it was the employer's fault that caused the accident. And sometimes in real life it is not so clear and it's not so easy to establish. So the lawyer will help the worker decide whether to go through compensation or to go through a legal suit. Being one of the leading NGOs in Singapore, it's often very difficult to do the work that we do unless we partner with like-minded organizations. So on the left there is another NGO in Singapore run by volunteer doctors and lawyers called HELSER. They are primarily a medical NGO for migrant workers. We partnered them in what we call the Geylang Food Project, which is a soup kitchen for distressed and needy workers. And we have partnered them since July 2012. More than 92,000 hot meals have been served to distressed and destitute migrant workers since the program began. Below students and youth, we have a very aggressive student outreach program because besides being an operational assistance unit that helps migrant workers, we are also an advocate. We are also trying to change mindsets. We are also trying to get Singaporeans to accept migrant workers and open up to migrant workers more and build a social compact that we have in Singapore. And we do a lot of this through engaging the young Singaporeans, youth and students, to increase acceptance, social cohesion and integration through service learning programs, events, talks, holiday attachments, vacation attachments. We have now reached out to more than 17,800 Singapore students since the program began in 2014. And also, finally, we have a very long-term partnership since January 2013 with the Seafarers mission called the International Lutheran Seafarers Mission. It is an international organization that concentrates its help on seafarers, sailors. If you remember, I mentioned earlier, they are excluded from our Employment Act, but that doesn't mean the Migrant Worker Center does not assist them. So some years ago, there was some talk after the US State Department released their annual anti-trafficking survey of all countries in the world. And in 2010, what they did was they downgraded Singapore from Tier 2. Some of you can Google and find out what this means. But they downgraded Singapore from Tier 2 to Tier 2 watch list. What this means is you are now on the watch list, and it is likely that if you don't improve the situation, you will drop to Tier 3. And in the report, what they did quote was that our being placed on the watch list was largely due to the fact that there was human trafficking, labor trafficking occurring using Singapore as a transit venue, meaning the trafficking destination was not Singapore, but people were transiting traffic workers through Singapore, and mostly as fishermen onto fishing vessels that docked at Singapore. So So they bring these workers from Indonesia, Philippines, anywhere else. They come through Singapore immigration. They get onto a fishing vessel. Their passports are taken away. Everything is taken away. So the worker essentially becomes a slave. He cannot move. He's kept on the vessel. And then the vessel plies the waters of Singapore for fishing. And so long as they never come back, they never dock, these workers are not allowed to disembark. No one ever knows about their plight. Right? And so we thought long and hard with the International Lutheran Seafarers Mission, and we felt the only way to solve this problem was to open a forward case reporting base. When I say forward, I mean even behind the immigration checkpoint. So that workers don't need a disembarkation pass to come into Singapore. We are right there where the fishing vessels dock. We are 5 meters away. And so we went to the government with our proposal, and we managed to get this forward case reporting base set up in 2013. Okay? Essentially what it did was it's now placed us back into tier 2. Right? So Singapore is no longer on the watch list. This forward reporting center has now served more than 20,000 seafarers of various nationalities that dock at the Singapore fishing port. Right? And they use our center, the forward center. They use it for recreational purposes, to take a shower, to Skype with their families, to Facebook with their families, and things like that. And of these 20,000 seafarers, so far, over the last 3-4 years, there have only been 1 suspected trafficking case that we have had. And I will speak about that later on. We also have a emotional and mental wellness initiative that we partner with an organization in Singapore called Silver Ribbon. This covers mental wellness and counseling, right? And it has a network of counseling centers in Singapore. So collaboration includes training and facilitation for my own staff on basic detection of mental stress, instability, or depression. And workers suspected of mental wellness issues are referred to Silver Ribbon for more specialist treatment. Of course, Silver Ribbon also has its own escalation network. Let's say if they need even more professional help from psychiatrists or psychologists, Silver Ribbon can make the decision and also help us to do the escalation. So the picture you have there is the training session that the Silver Ribbon staff was having for my own people. Okay, why do we have this counseling? There are a few reasons. The Migrant Worker Center operates Singapore's only 24-hour distress line for foreign workers. Okay? It is the only one of its kind in the country. It's 24 hours distress. I have an emergency team that is 24 hours ready to reach a migrant worker in trouble within 1 hour. Okay? Singapore is small, so most places you can reach within 1 hour. But the essential point is, when there are 4 emergencies, we have our own emergency protocol. If a worker is about to be physically abused, if a worker is about to be forcefully repatriated, in order to prevent him from bringing some kind of claim or grievance. Right? Number 3, if the worker is in danger of spending even 1 night in the open under the elements without proper housing, that is considered an emergency, and we house them immediately. And lastly, the 4th emergency is if workers are planning to do something, for example, hold an illegal strike or protest, that may end up getting them into more trouble than the employer that caused their grievance in the first place. We reach the worker within an hour to prevent the workers from doing something that is not advisable for their own protection and their own welfare. Okay? And because we run the only 24-hour distress line, and not only that, we run the only 24-hour distress line in Singapore in the worker's native language. So my staff, I have 19 staff. 19 staff, including me, 20 of us, we speak 16 different languages. Okay? And we speak all the native languages of the major migrant worker nationalities in Singapore. right? So I just briefly list. We speak Mandarin, Putonghua, right, for Chinese workers. We speak Bengali for the Bangladesh workers. We speak Tamil. Most of the Indian workers in Singapore come from the south, which is Tamil speaking. But we also speak several other Indian languages: Hindi, Punjabi, Marathi, Telugu, Malayalam, and a few more. And then we speak Thai, Myanmar, a few other languages. So most of the migrant worker nationalities in Singapore, the team speaks. And when we operate the helpline, we operate it in-house. It is my staff that take the calls every day and every night. And so it's important to train them in detecting psychological depression issues. Because over time, since we ran this 24-hour helpline about 6 years ago, we have had 2 suicide cases. The worker that called in was threatening to take their own life. And so my staff thankfully had received training. They were able to advise the worker to wait, and we were able to get the worker's specialist help. Okay? Go through 2 cases. This first case, I think you can translate the facts, but essentially we received a call, a tip call to our helpline, and a worker was complaining that the living conditions provided to them fell way below the legal requirements. And so we made a surprise visit, and we brought along the media, okay, the Singapore media, so the newspapers. And what we did through this visit was we were able to name and shame the employer publicly, for this is what he was doing, right? And through the publicity that we raised through this kind of action, we were able to get the employer punished 34 weeks jail for the manager, right? And these are some of the pictures of the conditions that were provided. Then there was a second case. Since I mentioned the Jurong Fishery Port Welfare Center, Forward Center earlier on, this was the one trafficking case that we saw. 11 Indonesian fishermen visited our center one evening and told us that they were regularly beaten on board. They didn't know where their passports were, and that the master of the ship, the captain, had a firearm, and he would regularly threaten them at gunpoint and also use the weapon to beat them. And so they complained one night when they docked on the 14th of February. What we did when we received this case was on the 15th of February, one day later, Singapore has now set up a national anti-trafficking task force made up of various government agencies cooperating together. We reported the case to the National Anti-Trafficking Task Force, and the following morning at 11 o'clock, basically I think half of our civil service was at the Jurong Fishery Port, boarding the vessel, inspecting the vessel, trying to look for the firearm, and helping the workers. So essentially we got the workers to come off the vessel, the police interviewed them, and decided they cannot allow the workers to go back onto the vessel because of the claims the workers were making. Then the Immigration Department in Singapore issued them disembarkation passes. The Migrant Worker Center took them into Singapore onto the mainland. We housed them in a dormitory, provided psychological assistance by Silver Ribbon, contacted the Indonesian embassy, and the embassy officials came to speak to them. And we also were able to make a contact with an NGO in Indonesia to help the workers once we sent them home. But to cut a long story short, all the 11 fishermen were sent home to their loved ones 4 days later. So within 4 days, we managed to rescue these fishermen. Okay? This is the picture of, the top left-hand picture is the Indonesian embassy talking to them. This one on the right is the Forward Center, if you can look at it, that's the Forward Center. And this is the picture below of the 11 Indonesian fishermen departing from Singapore's Changi Airport. The Migrant Worker Center has a mobile office. If you look up there, It's a mobile office. Essentially, it's a truck that's retrofitted to open up and be a forward office anywhere we want to operate. We use this for outreach, engagement, raising awareness about foreign workers' rights. But we also use this in our big cases where there are large groups of workers with disputes. And we go in with this vehicle, and what this does, it helps workers realize that, someone has arrived that will help you already. You don't have to be too tense. But what it also does, it scares employers. Because today, everyone in Singapore, especially the employers, know quite well that the Migrant Worker Center is a unit operated by the National Trades Union Congress of Singapore. And that we have shown over time that when it comes to protecting workers' rights, we can be very, very aggressive. Okay? So it's a useful tool to have. Okay, with that, generally, that is the Singaporean experience, more experience of the Migrant Worker Center. I understand that Taiwan is also opening up to hiring more migrant workers, and I hope that we can share experiences as we go, being predominantly labor importing countries rather than exporting countries. And so there's very much to learn from each other. So thank you for listening to my sharing. Thank you.
非常谢谢 Mr. Bernard 美美的分享，让我们更加了解新加坡以及国际是如何保护以及协助这些劳工。